The metal door rolled up with a shriek that echoed through the storage lot. Dust drifted in the narrow beam of morning light, and for a moment neither Walter nor Irene Mills moved. Inside, the unit looked like a small room lined with mirrors, except they weren't mirrors. They were televisions. Dozens of them. Old boxy sets, thin flat screens, even a few strange curved ones from the early days of plasma. 3 walls covered top to bottom in black screens, every cord trailing neatly to the floor where a single orange extension cable waited, unplugged, its end charred and curled. Irene felt her chest tighten. "Who on earth would keep all these?" she whispered. Walter didn't answer. He was staring at the screens as if they might blink first. 2 days earlier, their lives had looked far less cinematic. The Mills had been married for 47 years, long enough to learn how silence can become a kind of conversation. Retirement was supposed to have been easy, mornings with coffee, afternoons tending the garden, but the small financial company that handled their savings had folded overnight, taking most of their nest egg with it. The polite letters and phone calls that followed did nothing to fill the gap in their bank account. They tightened expenses, sold the second car, and told their grown daughter that they were doing just fine. But the truth pressed heavier each month. The house needed repairs, and even groceries seemed to cost double what they used to. That Thursday, Walter had stopped by the diner to read the local paper, half a habit, half an excuse to escape the sound of bills sliding through the mail slot. On the classifieds page between estate sale and antique tools, a small ad caught his eye. Storage auctions, abandoned units, one man's trash could be another's treasure. The words stuck in his head like a dare. He wasn't a gambler, not really, but something about the idea, taking a chance, even a small one, felt like moving instead of waiting. That evening, he mentioned it to Irene while she stirred soup in their narrow kitchen. At first, she laughed softly. "Walter, we can barely afford new curtains, and you want to buy someone else's junk?" But then she saw his face, the quiet determination beneath his modesty, and her smile faded into something gentler. "All right," she said, "but if we end up with a truckload of broken microwaves, you're explaining it to the neighbors." By morning, they had convinced themselves it wasn't recklessness, just curiosity. The storage lot sat a few miles outside town, a row of dull metal doors stretching under a faded sign that read Eastview Lock and Keep. The air smelled of asphalt and motor oil. About 20 people had gathered, men in caps with flashlights, women with clipboards, a few young couples filming on their phones. Walter and Irene stood near the back, feeling both out of place and quietly thrilled. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like gravel poured from a tin, began to open the doors one by one. The first unit held nothing but old mattresses and children's toys. The second, a stack of cracked mirrors. The third smelled of mildew so strong that even the curious stepped back. Irene squeezed Walter's arm. "Let's go home," she murmured. But he shook his head. "One more," he said. Then came Unit 47. The metal door was heavier, the padlock newer than the others. The auctioneer tapped it once with a gloved finger. "Been paid on for 10 years straight," he said. "Owner stopped 4 months ago. No contact info. Whatever's in there's been locked up a long time." He slid the latch and pulled the door up just enough for the crowd to peek inside. From where they stood, Walter could see only shapes, metal frames, a dull reflection of light, but something about the order of it caught his eye. No chaos, no piles. Just neat lines, like a display. Bidding started low, 200, then 3. Walter's hand rose almost on instinct. Irene whispered, "Are you sure?" He nodded. Sometimes you have to buy the mystery, not the answer. The auctioneer's chant quickened, 350, 4, 5, and then silence. Sold, 750, to the gentleman in the hat. The gavel struck like a full stop. Paperwork took 10 minutes. The manager handed them a brass key and a carbon copy receipt. "You've got 48 hours to clear it out," he said, the standard rule for abandoned units. Walter tucked the key into his jacket pocket like it was something precious. They drove home in near silence, the late afternoon light flashing through the trees. Irene finally said, "Do you think it's furniture?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the world's biggest mistake." They returned the next morning with gloves, flashlights, and a borrowed dolly. The storage lot was quieter now, the other buyers already gone, their chosen treasures hauled away in pickup trucks. The door of Unit 47 stood waiting, streaked with dust and faint fingerprints. Walter hesitated before turning the key. "Ready?" he asked. Irene exhaled through her nose. "Not really. Do it anyway." The door rolled up slowly, the metal groaning like a reluctant witness. Sunlight slipped across the floor and caught on glass. Then both of them froze. Inside, stacked in symmetrical rows, were televisions, dozens of them, maybe 30 or 40 in total, arranged like shelves of staring eyes. Some had thick plastic frames and dials yellowed with age, others were flat and modern, screens dark but uncracked. Each one was plugged into a web of extension cords that snaked across the concrete to a single orange strip lying in the center, its plug slightly blackened as if it had burned once. Irene's voice came out as a whisper. "Walter, what is this?" He stepped forward carefully, the soles of his boots crunching on grit. "I don't know. But somebody went to a lot of trouble." Along one wall sat a cardboard box filled with coiled cables, remote controls, and what looked like VHS tapes labeled in thick black marker, Summer 1988, Parade, Home, Test footage. Dust coated everything, but not thickly enough for decades. Someone had been here within the last few years. Walter crouched near the power strip. "Do you think they work?" Irene frowned. "Please don't start plugging things in. You'll blow the place up." He smiled faintly. "I just want to see." The plug felt brittle in his hand, the copper prongs dull. He hesitated, glanced back at her, then slid it into the socket near the door. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The air seemed to hold its breath. Then every screen blinked at once, a wave of light rolling from left to right. The unit glowed blue, the reflections dancing on their faces. And then, across every television, in the same white block letters, appeared a single date, 1988. Irene stepped back, her pulse quickening. What does that even mean? The air hummed faintly, a chorus of static behind the silence. Then, just as suddenly, all the screens went black. Walter stared at the dark glass, his reflection fractured 100 times. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess we just bought a mystery." For the rest of that morning, the word 1988 stayed in their heads like a tune they couldn't stop humming. Even after the lights went dark, the blue glow seemed to cling to their eyes. Irene insisted they leave the unit alone for a few hours, to let the dust settle, literally, as she put it. But Walter, restless in his quiet way, kept replaying the image of those synchronized screens. It wasn't just odd, it was deliberate. Someone had gone through the trouble of connecting every television, labeling every cable, leaving everything in perfect order. You don't do that unless you expect to come back. By noon, curiosity won. They returned to the storage lot, the brass keys still warm from Walter's pocket. The air outside had thickened with heat, and the tin doors along the row shimmered like scales. When they reached Unit 47, Irene hesitated, her reflection caught in the metal. "Promise me one thing," she said. "If these things start talking, we walk away." Walter smiled. "Deal." Inside, the room felt cooler, almost insulated. The televisions loomed like silent spectators. On the floor beside the power strip lay the box they'd noticed earlier, half collapsed under its own weight. Walter knelt and lifted it carefully. Inside were layers of smaller boxes, some for VHS tapes, others for camcorder reels, and a small tin case that rattled softly when shaken. He opened it to find keys. Dozens of them. Old metal tags hung from each ring, stamped with small numbers that didn't match the televisions but seemed organized in sequence. Irene frowned. "Keys for what?" Walter shrugged. "Maybe drawers, maybe machines. Let's start with the tapes." The first VHS tape was labeled Parade, June 1988. The handwriting was firm, clean. He found an old player stacked behind a television from the same decade, its surface sticky with age. After a bit of fumbling, he connected the cords and fed the tape in. The machine whirred, coughed, then filled the nearest screen with static that slowly melted into color. A marching band appeared, blurred around the edges, waving flags beneath a banner that read Greenfield Elementary Annual Fair. Children laughed off-screen, and a man's voice, steady, cheerful, narrated, "Testing audio. Parade sequence 1. Irene leaned closer. "This is just home footage." Walter didn't disagree, but something in the man's tone made him listen harder. It wasn't the easy rhythm of a parent filming a child. It was measured, professional. The camera panned methodically, almost like documentation. Then the image cut to black, and new words appeared, white against the void. Subject 02, control group. Irene's breath caught. "What does that mean?" Walter stopped the tape and ejected it, the sound sharp in the small space. They tried another, classroom, August 1988. More children, more staged angles, each clip precise and strangely impersonal. The same voice repeated names that weren't names at all. Subject 11, response normal. Subject 12, elevated. The scenes ended abruptly, as if someone had sliced through the reel with a knife. By the third tape, Irene's hands had begun to shake. Whoever made these wasn't filming family memories. Walter nodded slowly. "Feels more like experiments. Maybe some kind of research." She rubbed her palms together. "In a school?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. To steady themselves, they turned to the other boxes. One held cables and instruction manuals for early computer monitors. Another, envelopes marked service receipts, Greenville District A/V Department. That at least offered something real, proof that the owner had worked with electronics. But there was also a smaller box labeled "Do Not View Without Authorization." Inside it, under folded cloth, sat a single gold chain with a locket no bigger than a coin. Irene opened it gently. The hinge creaked. Inside was a faded photo of a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, smiling into the camera. The back of the photo had one word in pencil, Elliot. Something shifted in the air. Irene closed the locket and whispered, "Maybe this belonged to one of those kids." Walter rubbed the chain between his fingers, thinking. Or maybe the man who filmed them kept it to remember why he stopped. For a while, they worked in silence. Walter examined each power cord, tracing how all the sets connected through the single extension. Whoever had wired it had known exactly what they were doing. He found a switch box mounted behind the left wall, half hidden, but still functional. "Someone built this to synchronize playback," he said. "Every screen showing the same feed at once." Irene shivered. "For what purpose?" He didn't answer. Instead, he ran his finger along a small metal label beneath the switch. The engraving read Project Memora/Property of Greenville Unified Research, 1988. The name meant nothing to them, but it made the silence heavier. Irene opened the notebook she'd brought from the car and began writing, copying each label, each tape title, each word. It was her way of taking control. Walter began stacking the empty boxes near the door, careful not to disturb the wiring. They both felt it. Whatever they'd bought wasn't just storage. It was a record. When the afternoon light shifted to gold, Irene suggested they pack up for the day. As Walter unplugged the power strip, one television blinked briefly before dying. A faint ghost of static that whispered before vanishing. They left the unit locked and drove home without speaking. The hum of the truck engine filled the gaps their thoughts couldn't cross. That evening, over tea, Irene laid the locket on the table. "If these tapes show what I think they do, shouldn't we tell someone?" Walter stirred his cup slowly. "Tell them what?" "That we bought a science project from 1988. He looked up, tired but certain. "Let's find out what we're holding before we let it go." Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Irene watched the dark yard for a long time before turning off the light. In her dreams, rows of blue screens glowed again, and across them the same white numbers repeated like a heartbeat that refused to stop. 1988. 1988. 1988. The next morning began with a silence that felt almost ceremonial. The coffee pot gurgled, the kitchen clock ticked, and both sounds carried the same question neither of them had the courage to ask out loud. What exactly did we buy? Irene sat at the table with her notebook, the pages now filled with neat lists of serial numbers, labels, and the name that haunted them since yesterday, Project Memora. She had looked it up online before breakfast, expecting to find something official. Instead, there was nothing. No company, no research program, No trace of a Greenville Unified Research beyond a mention in a decades-old news archive about a defunct school district technology grant. It was as if the name had been erased deliberately, leaving only this strange museum of screens behind. Walter arrived at the lot just after 9. The air smelled faintly of rain on metal, and the morning sun painted thin shadows across the pavement. The manager nodded as he passed but didn't ask questions. Storage lots were places where curiosity went to die. He unlocked Unit 47 and lifted the door. The stale, electrical scent rushed out to meet him, half dust, half memory. Inside, the televisions waited, silent, expectant. He'd brought tools this time: a screwdriver, gloves, and a small voltage tester. Irene had stayed home to call their friend Earl, the one who first told them about storage auctions. He'd mentioned knowing an electronics dealer who sometimes bought vintage sets for parts. If these screens turned out to be worthless, at least they might recoup some of their money. But before selling anything, Walter wanted to understand what he was touching. He began by tracing the cables again. The wiring was almost artistic, each connection routed precisely, each plug labeled with a small piece of tape marked by date and code. The handwriting was the same as on the VHS tapes: deliberate, tidy, clinical. He unplugged the smallest television, a mid-90s Panasonic, and lifted it to test its weight. It was surprisingly light. But when he tried the next one, a newer flat screen, he nearly lost his grip. It was far heavier than it should have been, dense in a way that made no mechanical sense. He set it down carefully, his breath steadying. Kneeling beside it, he found the screws along the back panel slightly worn, as if someone had opened it often. Using his screwdriver, he loosened each one until the cover came free with a faint metallic sigh. Inside, instead of the familiar tangle of circuits, something else gleamed. A narrow steel compartment bolted between the speakers, large enough to hold a hardcover book. Walter reached in with gloved hands and slid it free. The compartment had no markings except a serial number stamped faintly along one edge. It was locked, but one of the keys from the tin box fit perfectly. The latch clicked. Inside lay a small velvet pouch and a folded envelope yellowed with time. He opened the envelope first. A single page rested inside, typed on thin paper. Inventory specimen log. Project memo, Phase 3. Containment protocol in effect. Do not separate storage medium from associated identifier. No signature, no date beyond the same year as everything else, 1988. Beneath the paper, in the pouch, was something heavier, a gold bracelet, simple in design but unmistakably valuable. It wasn't decorative junk. It was real, weighty, and marked on the clasp with 3 tiny initials, IM. For a long moment, Walter just stared. The logical part of his mind tried to explain it away. Maybe the owner hid valuables inside an old casing to avoid theft. But why label it as part of a research project? And why store so many televisions, all wired together, each one perhaps holding something inside? He placed the bracelet carefully back in the pouch and locked the compartment again. When Irene arrived an hour later, she found him sitting on a folding chair beside the half-dismantled set, the envelope on his lap. "You opened one," she said, half accusing, half relieved. He nodded slowly. "You need to see this." She read the paper twice before speaking. "Specimen log? That sounds like science fiction." "I found this with it," he said, handing her the pouch. She weighed the bracelet in her palm, the gold catching the weak light. "This isn't a specimen, Walter. This is jewelry." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Irene said, "If one of these has something inside, what about the others?" That single question hung in the air like a dare. By early afternoon, they had removed the backs from 4 more televisions. 2 were empty. One held an old reel of microfilms sealed in plastic. Another contained a tin-marked audio archive, Batch 7. Each discovery made the pattern clearer and stranger. It was as if someone had built a vault disguised as a gallery, each set guarding a different kind of relic. The objects weren't random, they were categorized. Irene started to keep track, listing every item beside its screen number. "Whoever did this wanted it preserved," she said softly. "Maybe they thought no one would ever look here." Midway through the day, their friend Earl stopped by, curious to see what they'd found. When Walter explained, Earl scratched his beard. "Never seen anything like it," he admitted. "But if there's jewelry in there, that's worth more than your bid already. You might be sitting on a collector's stash." Walter shook his head. "Collectors don't label things like containment protocols." Earl whistled low. "Well, if you don't want the headache, I can call a guy in Raleigh. Pays cash for gold." Irene smiled politely, but her tone was firm. "Not yet. We need to understand what we're holding." As evening approached, they packed up, careful to leave everything as they'd found it. Walter locked the door and slid the key into his pocket. The parking lot was nearly empty now, long shadows stretching across the concrete. From somewhere nearby, a car door slammed, sharp against the quiet. Irene glanced toward the sound but saw nothing except the reflection of their truck in the glass office window. That night, back home, she spread their notes across the dining table. Each line of her handwriting felt heavier than the last. Bracelet, microfilm, audioton. She drew a slow circle around the phrase Project Memra and wrote beside it, "Why preserve? Why hide?" Walter turned the bracelet over in his fingers, watching how it caught the lamplight. "Whoever owned this didn't want it lost," he said. "But they didn't want it found either." Later, as they were locking up for bed, Irene thought she heard a faint hum, the same low tone that had filled the unit when the televisions came alive. She went to the window and looked out. Across the street, parked under a broken streetlight, sat a dark sedan she didn't recognize. Its headlights were off, but she could see the glow of a phone screen through the windshield. Someone was there, waiting. She called softly down the hall, "Walter?" But by the time he joined her, the car was gone, rolling silently out of sight. The following morning carried that fragile kind of calm that usually comes before something shifts. Walter packed his tools into the truck with the same quiet determination he once used when setting out for work on winter mornings, and Irene followed, clutching the worn leather binder that had now become their shared anchor. Neither said much on the way to the storage lot. They simply listened to the hum of the engine and the slow rhythm of the tires against asphalt. When they rolled up the door of Unit 47, the sight of those screens lined in perfect symmetry no longer startled them, yet it didn't feel familiar either. The room still carried that faint metallic odor of dust, time, and forgotten electricity. They both sensed they were not excavating junk anymore. They were walking through someone's archive. Walter began unscrewing another row of televisions while Irene cataloged every label, each one written in that same controlled, technical handwriting. Behind the fourth screen he found something different. A slim, steel tray holding a sealed microfiche cartridge. Its label, still crisp after decades, read, "Greenville Unified Research, Project Memra. Intake Index 1987 to 1989. Irene leaned in, eyes bright with curiosity. It wasn't money or gold this time, it was information. "That's the story," she whispered, sliding the cartridge into an envelope as if it were made of glass. They decided she would take it to the library while Walter kept working. They had learned by now that too much excitement could lead to carelessness, and carelessness around this kind of mystery never ended well. The library felt like neutral ground, the kind of place where answers still came on paper. The clerk, a patient woman with wire-rimmed glasses, showed Irene how to load the microfiche reader. As the first frame flickered into view, Irene's breath caught. Across the top of the glowing image, in bold type, appeared Community Archive Project, Greenville Unified Research, 1988. Below that ran line after line of entries: donor name, item type, custody tag, final status. Most were ordinary, journals, audio cassettes, photo reels, but halfway down, one line froze her hand. May 7, 1988, jewelry, gold bracelet, donor initials, retained. It was the exact description of the bracelet they'd found hidden inside the heavy television. The next few entries matched as well: audio tapes, batch 7, microfilm reels, oral histories, even archival tin, student materials. This was no secret experiment or criminal cache. It was a memory project, a kind of local time capsule created after the floods that had swept through the county that spring. Families had entrusted keepsakes to the district, hoping they'd be preserved until rebuilding finished. But as Irene advanced the film, the story turned darker. Every later entry bore a red stamp that bled through the frame. Program suspended, legal review pending, custodianel. Pena. The record simply stopped that autumn. Funding vanished, paperwork froze, and the contents, thousands of community artifacts, were moved into private storage for temporary safekeeping. She copied 3 frames, wrote down the custodian's name, and realized with a chill that someone had kept paying rent for 35 years until those payments suddenly stopped 4 months ago. Whoever Pena was, he had kept this archive alive long after the world forgot it. When she returned, Walter was waiting outside the unit, sitting on a crate, holding something small in his hand, a brass key-tagged River Federal Bank, Box 314. It had been sealed inside another television, along with a short note that read simply, Custody, Memra. Irene explained what she'd found at the library, and the pattern began to form like a photograph in developing fluid. This wasn't just a forgotten hoard. It was a structured archive, each object linked to a record, each record to a custodian. Somewhere, that custodian had tied the final pieces to a safe deposit box. The bracelet, the microfilm, the key, they weren't random prizes. They were fragments of a single story interrupted mid-sentence. They took everything to a local attorney that afternoon. A calm, deliberate woman who listened without interrupting, then organized their documents like a chessboard. After several minutes of quiet reading, she spoke in the tone of someone used to untangling legal ghosts. "You've done nothing wrong," she said. "You purchased the contents legally. But this key and these papers suggest continuing obligations. Whoever controlled this program intended these assets to stay together. Let me reach out to the bank officially. And if anyone contacts you, refer them to me." Her confidence steadied Irene's heart in a way no reassurance from Walter could. When they returned to the lot at dusk to secure the unit, the air had changed. The door rolled up with its usual metallic groan, but inside, something felt off. A coil of cable that Walter had left on the workbench now lay neatly coiled on the floor, centered perfectly, as if placed there by a careful hand. One television along the left wall had been pulled slightly forward, its screws lying on the concrete like silver breadcrumbs. Walter's jaw tightened. "I didn't do that," he said quietly. Irene crouched, photographing the scene. Nothing else was missing, but the message was unmistakable. Someone had been inside. They reattached the screws, tidied the space, and closed the door halfway. The echo that followed was sharper than usual, less like closing storage and more like sealing something alive. Back at the truck, they found a cream-colored business card tucked beneath the wiper blade. Thick paper, blind embossed text, Hollis Grant, Asset Reclamation. No address, only a number. Walter turned it over, then passed it to Irene, who slid it into the binder and wrote the date and time beside it. Neither said the words both were thinking, that people who leave cards like that don't knock twice. That night, sleep came in fragments. Walter hid the bank key in his tool chest, Irene placed the bracelet in the sugar tin, and the binder went into a locked drawer. Around midnight she woke to headlights sweeping across the living room wall. The car outside slowed, idled, then rolled away without stopping. She stood by the window until the sound faded, the reflection of her face overlapping the streetlight's glow like 2 exposures of the same uneasy film. Before returning to bed, she wrote a single line in her notebook, her handwriting slow but steady. "If someone else has a key, we're no longer the only ones telling this story." And as she set the pen down, she realized the hum she'd heard faintly beneath the silence wasn't her imagination at all. It was the sound of old screens waking somewhere far away. The morning after the card appeared, the couple woke before dawn, both aware that the day ahead would draw a line through everything that had happened. Walter brewed coffee, strong and dark, more for the ritual than for the taste, while Irene arranged the documents on the kitchen table in precise order: auction receipt, photographs, the microfilm prints, the bracelet, and the brass key-tagged River Federal Bank 314. Neither spoke much. Words would only clutter what both already knew. Outside, the world was still wrapped in fog, the streets empty, the sky the color of cooled steel. When they finally stepped into the truck, the dashboard clock showed 7:30, yet it felt later, as though time itself had been waiting for them to move. At the attorney's office, everything looked deliberately ordinary: beige walls, the faint smell of toner, the low murmur of phones behind glass. Their lawyer greeted them with that calm confidence that comes from both experience and good sense. "I called River Federal," she said, holding up a thin folder. "The box exists, registered under the name Luis Pena, your custodian. It hasn't been accessed in over 30 years. Because you lawfully purchased the related property, you have the right to open it, but we'll do this formally, under supervision." Walter nodded, feeling a quiet relief at the sound of procedure. Paperwork, after all, was something you could hold. Danger was usually the thing that hid from signatures. The bank's interior had that timeless hush that belongs to places built to hold secrets. A manager escorted them to the vault level, where each breath seemed to echo. The small brass key fit the slot with surprising ease. The box slid free, heavier than expected. They carried it to a felt-lined table, where the attorney waited with a notary and a witness. The lid opened with a reluctant sigh. Inside lay several bundles of envelopes bound with ribbon, a small notebook covered in waxed cloth, and a folded document stamped Greenville Unified Research, Final Memorandum. No gold, no cash, no hidden treasure, only paper, yet Irene's fingers trembled as she touched it, because she knew instinctively that this was the real value, the reason someone had guarded the storage unit all these years. The memorandum was dated November 1989. It detailed the dissolution of Project Memora, listing thousands of catalog donations and their transfer to off-site storage pending reassignment to a public trust. But the last paragraph read differently, handwritten in blue ink beneath the typed lines. Funding withdrawn. Public custody unsafe. Items consolidated privately until claimants may be located. Key retained. Pena. Beneath the signature was another note added later, smaller and more desperate. "If I am gone, ensure this archive finds a voice. The stories belong to everyone, not to those who pay rent on silence." Irene read it twice before looking up. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Walter said, softly, he didn't hide it for profit. He hid it to protect it. The small notebook confirmed it. Each page listed names, addresses, and item tags, hundreds of them. Besides, some were check marks, meaning the donor had reclaimed their belongings. Others were blank, meaning the family had moved or vanished. There was even a section marked unclaimed valuables, to be held indefinitely. Among them, the entry, bracelet, gold, personal engraving. Irene recognized the initials immediately. She realized they hadn't just uncovered misplaced property, they had reopened a forgotten community vault. What had seemed like randomness was, in truth, order disguised by time. They left the bank carrying scanned copies, leaving the originals under the attorney's seal. The cold air outside felt sharper, cleaner. But the moment Walter started the truck, he noticed the same black sedan parked half a block down. Its engine idled, exhaust curling like breath on glass. Irene pretended not to see it, though the reflection in the side mirror betrayed her awareness. When they pulled away, the sedan waited 10 seconds before following. The lawyer's car, however, slipped in behind them, a silent escort. Sometimes, sunlight really does change appetites, but it rarely removes shadows instantly. Back home, they spread the documents across the dining table and began sorting by priority. The first task was preservation, scanning every page, labeling files, creating multiple backups. The second was communication. The attorney advised them to contact a regional museum, one known for handling local heritage archives. Irene sent an inquiry that evening, attaching a brief summary and one photograph of the ledger's first page. By morning, the registrar himself had replied, expressing astonishment. Project Memora had become a local legend, a government pilot thought to have collapsed without trace. If verified, their materials could rebuild an entire lost chapter of civic history. He requested a meeting the next day. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. The house seemed to pulse with quiet vigilance, the fridge motor too loud, the wind too sharp. He sat in the darkened kitchen, staring at the binder that had started all of this. For the first time, he wondered whether luck and responsibility were just two sides of the same coin. Irene joined him near midnight, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You think that man Pena ever found peace?" she asked. Walter shook his head. "Probably not. but maybe he trusted that someone would. She touched his hand and whispered, "Then let's make sure he was right." The next afternoon, they met the museum registrar, a tall man with kind eyes and an archivist's patience. He examined their evidence carefully, his fingertips hovering over each document as though afraid to smudge history itself. "These are extraordinary," he said. "They prove continuity of custody. You didn't stumble on lost property, you inherited a public trust." The phrase public trust struck Irene deeply. It meant responsibility, not ownership. It also meant that the right kind of publicity could protect them from the wrong kind of attention. With the attorney's guidance, the museum proposed a partnership. The Turners would loan the materials for authentication and exhibit, ensuring transparency. All correspondence with reclamation agents, legitimate or not, would route through legal counsel. It was the bureaucratic version of armor, and they accepted. Still, a final piece of fear lingered. That evening, when they stopped by the storage lot to close the unit for good, the door rolled open easily, too easily. Inside, nothing was damaged, yet every television screen was powered on, faintly glowing blue. Each displayed the same frozen date, 1988, just as on the day they'd first opened the unit. Walter walked slowly along the wall, checking the cords. None were plugged in. The power strip lay coiled on the floor, disconnected. Irene felt a chill crawl up her spine. Whatever had triggered the displays, it wasn't electricity. She took one photograph, then reached for Walter's hand. "Let's go," she said quietly. "The story's already written." He nodded, closed the door, and this time the lock clicked with finality. Within days, news spread. A local paper published an article titled "Forgotten Archive Found in Storage Unit. Couple Helps Restore Lost History." The photo showed Irene and Walter standing beside the museum registrar, modest smiles on their faces, the binder open between them. The story traveled farther than they expected, neighboring counties, regional television, even a short radio piece about the seniors who saved Greenville's memory. With publicity came safety. The mysterious calls stopped. The sedan disappeared. Hollis Grant and his so-called reclamation service never resurfaced. Perhaps exposure had burned away their shadow business. Perhaps they had simply moved on to easier prey. Weeks passed. The museum authenticated every item, verifying each serial number, matching each donor's record. The ledgers confirmed that Project Memora had indeed safeguarded community donations after the 1988 floods, and that Pena had continued paying for storage until his death in early spring that year, the same year payments ceased. In gratitude, the museum dedicated a small gallery to him and listed Walter and Irene as co-curators. The gold bracelet, cleaned and displayed beside a photo of the original donor's family, drew quiet crowds. Beneath it, the placard read, "Recovered and preserved thanks to two ordinary people who chose honesty over profit." For Walter and Irene, the reward was simpler than money. The modest compensation they received from the museum and auction house covered their debts and repaired the roof, but the true profit was something quieter, a sense of belonging, of having restored something that mattered. The storage lot, once a symbol of chance and risk, became a place they now passed without fear. Each row of corrugated doors looked less like mystery and more like a reminder that forgotten doesn't mean lost. One mild spring afternoon, they revisited the museum's new exhibit. School children wandered between glass cases, their voices soft with awe. On a central wall hung a still photograph of Unit 47's interior, the screens frozen on the blue digits 1988, explained in a caption as a timestamp from the program's earliest database. "So that's what it meant," Irene murmured. "The year the community came together." Walter smiled, placing his hand over hers. "Or maybe the year someone refused to give up." Outside, the sun was warm, the air alive with the scent of lilac from the museum garden. They sat on a bench, letting silence stretch comfortably between them. "Funny," Irene said after a while, "how a gamble that cost $600 turned into something priceless." Walter chuckled. "Guess luck shows up disguised as work." For a long moment, neither moved. Then Irene looked toward the horizon, where light shimmered off parked cars and the sky turned the color of pewter again, just as it had the morning they'd opened the box. "Do you think people will remember any of this?" she asked. They will, he answered, because you wrote it down. If stories like theirs, about ordinary folks uncovering forgotten truths, make you believe the world still rewards decency, leave a kind word, share it with someone who needs hope, and remember, sometimes history survives because simple people care enough to keep the lights on a little longer. That evening, as they drove home, the road stretched wide and empty ahead of them. The town rolled by, modest houses, bright windows, the steady rhythm of life continuing. For the first time in months, Walter didn't check the mirrors for a following car. The past had found its rightful place, and so had they. At a red light, Irene reached over, resting her hand on his. "You know," she said, smiling, "maybe we didn't just buy a storage unit. Maybe we bought back a little faith." The light changed. The truck moved forward, slow and steady, toward a future that finally felt like their own. And somewhere, deep within the museum vault, a row of screens glowed faintly once more, not in warning this time, but in recognition.